Well, greetings, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate the media being here today to cover our news conference. Thank you very much. So there are a few things we're going to do during this press conference. First, we are here to introduce the coalition that is formed for the purpose of ending child sexual abuse. Ending abuse. That is our mission. And I really appreciate the organizations. There are now 10 organizations that are part of the Protect Every Child coalition. And I want to go over what those organizations are. Well, the first one I'm going to mention is Protect LDS Children. So last year, we did a lot of stuff with Protect LDS Children. Our mission and Protect LDS Children has not stopped. Our mission is to bring awareness to the unsafe policies of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to encourage members to protect their children, and cause the LDS Church to change dangerous interview protocols. Specifically, we call on the Mormon Church to stop one-on-one interviews and to cease asking children questions about their sexual practices. Those are still going on. In fact, the vast majority of interviews with children are one-on-one, regardless of what the church has said their policy change is made. The policy change they made was that if the child desires, another adult may be in the room. Now, you just imagine when you were a kid, if you're a 14-year-old kid, are you really going to say, the bishop wants to see me, I think I want my mommy to be there? No, that just doesn't happen. It's the parents that should have the responsibility. Actually, there should be no one-on-one interviews. What do you do when the parent doesn't have any kids that are involved? What do you do when, I don't want to go through all those scenarios, but that's the mission of the Protect LDS Children. Last year we gathered over 50,000 signatures. We collected thousands of stories of child abuse that resulted from current practices in the Mormon Church, and that abuse continues. I wanted to share one part of a definition of child abuse. This is in Texas. Inflicting mental or emotional injury, impairing a child's growth, development, or psychological functioning. But you know what? The federal law sounds very similar to that. The Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act defines child abuse, among other things, as mental or emotional injury to a child that results in an observable and material impairment in the child's growth, development, or psychological function. Based on these definitions, we have gathered the documentation that the Mormon Church's policies have facilitated the abuse of thousands upon thousands of children, all alone, behind the closed doors of a bishop's office. Okay, enough about Protect LDS Children. Second one on our coalition, the Child Friendly Faith Project. Our vision is that no child suffers abuse or neglect as a result of religious belief, doctrine, or practice. Our mission is to share knowledge and build community around the issues of religious child maltreatment and advocate for and empower those whose lives are impacted. Now, I really like the statement, no child suffers of abuse. Now, you know, this is a pretty big goal to say no child suffers of abuse, but that is where our vision needs to be. Number 3, talk to a survivor. We work to mobilize Utah citizens to build a community free from sexual harassment and assault. Wouldn't it be nice to have a community where none of our children are going to suffer from sexual assault? And that's what they're working towards. Number 4, children matter. Our mission is 1, educate legislatures so laws will be more protective of children. 2, advocate for children and empower their parents. And 3, educate all who care for children about the consequences of abuse, the universal tactics of predators, and the ways to better protect their children. I really like what they're doing. The Open Stories Foundation is part of our coalition. Their mission is to promote understanding, healing, growth, and community for people experiencing or impacted by religious transition. Now, so they're talking about religious transition, but they really stepped up big time to support the movement last year, Protect LDS Children. James, Vernon, and Weeks, a law firm. We have represented hundreds of child sex abuse victims. Our staff offers compassionate, smart, yet aggressive legal representation. We hold perpetrators and those who harbor them responsible. We help our clients heal. So I'm not sure how good of a view I used to have about lawyers that sued institutions for stuff like this. Oh boy, we need this to happen. Institutions need to be held accountable. Anybody that has had a child or any child that's now adult, I would encourage you, sue the institution that facilitated that happening. They're not changing the way they should. The Catholic Church has started to make changes, but a lot of that happened because of the, I don't know, is it billions of dollars in damages that they've had to pay out? Well, good. If nobody had sued them, if there wasn't somebody like this, James, Vernon, and Weeks out there willing to take on this massive institution, they wouldn't be making changes. Well, there are other institutions like the Mormon Church that are not making the changes. I am glad there are law firms like this that have the courage to stand up to a super wealthy institution for standing up to hold accountable their facility for children being abused. Number 7, the Zero Abuse Project. Our organization is committed to the elimination of child sexual abuse. Now, when we decided that the mission of Protect Every Child was to eliminate sexual abuse, I didn't even know about Zero Abuse, the Zero Abuse Project. But I love this. There are many organizations right now that are working to eliminate child sexual abuse. Our vision is a world where every child is free of abuse. Our mission is to protect children from abuse and sexual assault by engaging people and resources through a trauma-informed approach of education, research, advocacy, and advanced technology. Our programs are designed to provide training and education to professionals and students and to help transform institutions to effectively prevent, recognize, and respond to child sexual abuse. So, we have a representative of that Zero Abuse Project that will be addressing us right after this. Number 8, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, also known as SNAP. They have been hugely supportive of our efforts. From the very beginning, a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago, when we started Protect LDS Children, actually, Joelle wrote a marvelous article that I learned a ton of stuff from, and so I really appreciate the support from SNAP. And then Judy, who will also be speaking as a representative from SNAP, she was there day one, as was Lisa, when we stepped onto Temple Square to protest what is happening behind Bishop's closed doors. Okay. This is SNAP, the largest, oldest, and most active support group for women and men wounded by religious and institutional authorities, priests, ministers, bishops, deacons, nuns, coaches, teachers, and others. Our most powerful tool is the light of truth. Through our actions, we bring healing, prevention, and justice. SNAP is an independent, peer network of survivors of institutional sexual abuse and their supporters who work to support survivors, protect children, protect the vulnerable, heal the wounded, and expose the truth. Number 9, and as I mentioned, we do have a representative. So glad you're here, Judy from SNAP. Number 9, and this one just came on board, Restore Our Humanity, and we have 2 representatives from Restore, 3 representatives from Restore Our Humanity. Thank you very much for being part of our coalition. They are working with and for survivors of sexual abuse within the confines of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They have documented cover-ups of sex abuse and are working to prevent child abuse by helping adult victims who were victims as children go public. So thank you very much. Appreciate your work. And number 10, Protect Every Child is part of that coalition of 10 organizations. And our goal, summed up, is to eliminate child sexual abuse by raising awareness to the epidemic of child abuse. I mean, there are things we hear about that are bad in society, but this is gigantically bad in society. It is everywhere. Joelle's going to give us some statistics that are just frightening. We are calling for protection measures to be put in place in all child-serving institutions. There should not be a single church that doesn't have strong protections for children, and we've outlined what those protections should be. We're calling for parents to ensure that strong protections are in place in the institutions their children participate in. Otherwise, we're calling for them to leave that institution. Don't put your children at risk. You don't want to find out 10 years later what your child was subjected to 10 years before that. Get them out of any organization that doesn't have strong child protection in place. We're also calling for legislators to do their part to protect our children, to value the interests of children first over that of corporations and institutional churches. Okay, so there's our 10-member coalition, and I'll leave your microphone here. I almost took it, whoever it is. Now, we have two representatives here, one, Joelle, and I didn't write down your credentials. Maybe you can explain that. Representing Zero Abuse Project, and then we'll hear from Judy Kaepernick, a good friend from the last few years of actions. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Joelle Castex, Joelle, CA, S as in Sam, T as in Tom, EIX as in X-ray. And I'm a founding board member of the Zero Abuse Project. And we are a nonprofit dedicated to the elimination of child sexual abuse. Previous to that, I was highly involved in SNAP, a tremendous organization. And the reason I got involved in SNAP is because I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, and I've dedicated my career to helping other survivors gain their voice. Child sexual abuse is a public safety crisis in the United States and around the world. It is grossly underreported. Statistics released by the Department of Justice say that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused by the age of 18. But we don't really know about the validity of those numbers because we don't know exactly what the definitions of child sexual abuse are from state to state. But what we do know is this: most children do not report. We do know that most children who are sexually abused live in shame and secrecy. And when they are abused within the religious institutions where they are born, where they are baptized, where they are married, where they go on to baptize their children, and where their family members are then buried, they will continue to carry that shame and secrecy with them for the rest of their lives. That's why people like Judy and myself have dedicated ourselves to giving survivors a voice. Because the number one thing that we can do to stop the cycle of child sexual abuse is to ensure that survivors are given the right and the safety to speak, and a safe place to come forward to expose the abuse and to expose the institutions that have covered up that abuse. And the way that we do that is by changing our civil laws that allow survivors to come forward and report the abuse in our civil justice system, that allows them to use the courts, that allows them to expose the abuse in the institutions that have fostered and facilitated the abuse for decade upon decade upon decade. We've been able to do that in states such as Arizona, which recently opened a 1.5-year civil window. So survivors of sexual abuse there no matter the abuser, whether that abuser is a Catholic priest, a Mormon bishop, a parent, a coach, or a teacher. That survivor, no matter when the abuse occurred, can go to the civil courts and say, this happened to me. I'm going to come forward, expose the abuse and the institution that covered it up, and it's safe for me to come forward. That is why it's important for attorneys such as the one mentioned earlier and many other attorneys who have decided to carry the mantle for survivors. That is why it is important for those attorneys and for survivors to know that it is safe to come forward. We have opened windows in New York and New Jersey, and these have been long legislative fights. That is why it is important to reclassify child sexual abuse, not as just a crime against children, but as a public safety crisis. Because we need to take the sex out of child sexual abuse and remove that shame and that burden off of our children and turn it into the public health issue that it is. Because survivors and victims carry a lifetime of health issues, depression, anxiety, autoimmune issues. They are more likely to suffer from cancer. They are more likely to suffer from other health issues. This is not just a crime against a child. This is a lifelong health crisis that our society carries. And if we start treating it as such, we can start getting the monies to help treat these survivors, help expose the crime, and stop the cycle. And finally, we must give survivors a voice, and we do that through this coalition. We do that through the march that Sam will be talking about later on. Because the more we talk about abuse, and the more we take the burden off of survivors, and the more that we release the shame and the secrecy off of victims, and the more we hold institutions accountable through legislative change, and the more that we look at predators and say, no more, no more, we will stop the cycle of abuse, and we will make our children safer. Because our children are not resilient. Our children do not bounce back. They simply survive. And our children deserve a much better world than just surviving. They deserve a world where they can thrive. And that's a world that survivors today are creating for them by finding their voice. So when a survivor comes to you and says, something happened to me, the best thing you can do and say for them is, I believe you. I support you. I am here for you. We together will get help, and we will stop the cycle. Again, I implore each and every one of you here today. We all know survivors of child sexual abuse, and they will not tell you that they are a survivor. They will tell you that they're struggling with addiction. They will tell you that they are struggling with obesity. They will tell you they're struggling with domestic violence. They will tell you they're struggling with anger issues. They will tell you that they're struggling with cancer, autoimmune issues, fibromyalgia. They will tell you that they are depressed. They will tell you that they are isolated. They will tell you that they have fear and anger issues or that they are unstable. That is the public health issue that we need to address today. Because by banding together in this coalition, we will stop the cycle of child sexual abuse, and we will get predators off the streets, and we will empower our survivors, and we will make this world a safer place for all children. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Judy Larson. Sam has a problem with my maiden name because it's difficult to pronounce, Clapperich. So
I've never gotten it right.
that's okay. I've heard even worse. So I've had this name for 72 years, so. I'm going to be quoting some statistics from the Utah Health Department, and for the media, I have handouts of the information from the Health Department if you're interested. 4,880,716,639 each year in taxpayer money is spent covering the costs of sexual violence in Utah, per the Utah Department of Health. 84.4% is spent on perpetrators. 15.1% is spent on victims. And 0.5% is spent on prevention. The cost per incident of sexual violence is $184,504. Among others, these costs include medical and mental health care, investigation and adjudication, confinement and/or treatment, sexually transmitted infections, suffering and lost quality of life, and lost work for victims. Utah taxpayers pay a heavy price for sexual predation, money that could be spent on prevention of sexual violence, on schools, on infrastructure, any number of other more productive and positive societal needs. These numbers can be staggering to comprehend. Each incident of sexual violence is a person, a human being entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I was raped at the age of 10 by a Catholic priest in another state. Child predators prey upon those they believe will not report the crime. I was taught, as many children in other religions are, that church leaders are predominantly men of God, stand-ins for whichever deity your faith worships. As such, they are mentors, exemplars, men to be trusted and listened to and obeyed. My parents instructed us to obey and not talk back to nuns and priests. If my parents heard that we had disobeyed or talked back, there would be a beating with the belt, which was common practice in America in the 1950s. Spare the rod and spoil the child was the mantra. So I knew that I couldn't tell my parents what the priest did to me because I would not be believed, and I would get a bare butt beating with the belt. Absolutely a disincentive to disclose. I couldn't tell the nuns, I would face the same outcome. My mother died 10 years ago, not knowing. On July 12th, I placed a letter from little Judy describing the horror done to her by a supposed man of God in my father's casket. Now he knows and can tell Mom. I learned not to trust people in authority because they could hurt me. That included bosses at work. So I would quit a job when I felt the boss was going to hurt me in some way. I believed that I was dirty and unworthy of love. I believed that I was different and not in a good way. I wondered, did I ask for it? In order to survive, I wore my "I'm fine" mask. I believed that I had to overachieve to compensate and cover up the awful secret of my shame. I was an A student. I was athletic. I obeyed my parents slavishly. I never skipped a day of school. I excelled at taking scholastic tests. I became teachers' pets so they would like me despite my horrific secret. I tried never to disappoint anybody. If you found out my secret, shame, you would not want to have anything to do with me, and I would be more alone than I already feel. I lost my innocence, my childhood, my relationship with my parents, my faith in a God, my self-respect, my dreams for the future. I endured soul murder. I have suffered from many of the lifelong effects of sexual violence and shame inflicted at a young age. I've been treated for depression for over 50 years. I suffer from anxiety and am hypervigilant of my surroundings and the people near me. I have been diagnosed with PTSD. I have felt inadequate and not good enough all my life. I have worked to control situations and others because when the priest was raping me, the only thing I could control was my breathing. I have 2 failed marriages. I have trouble identifying feelings other than numbness and fear of further violence or of being found out to be less than by people I care about. Many victims of childhood assault have somatic symptoms, as Joelle stated: stomach aches, headaches, an increased autoimmune response. Some use substances to dull the pain and become addicted. Others kill themselves out of desperation. The number one reason that victims of sexual predators don't disclose is fear of not being believed. My reality is that a man in authority used that power to harm me. But if I told, trusted adults would call me a liar and punish me for telling my truth. That distorted what I believed to be real because I lived the rapes. I felt the pain and shame, and you are telling me it didn't happen. But it did happen, more than once, and without my consent. He groomed me and used my parents' devotion to their faith against me as leverage to keep me silent. He told me, "No one will believe you if you tell," and I believed him. 3 other women have come forward with allegations that this same man sexually violated them. There are most likely others who have not been found the courage to disclose. I didn't know that until March of 2016, 59 years after he raped me. I thought I was the only one, because he told me that I was special and he paid extra attention to me. Shaming is a form of bullying, a toxic stress. The body responds to toxic stress in a similar way that it responds to an infection. A bully can control how other people perceive you and how you perceive yourself. Shame makes you fearful, uncomfortable in social situations, inclined to avoid groups of people for fear of being shamed. A victim of bullying feels alone, afraid, powerless, and stuck in a situation they have no control over. This can lead to becoming more attuned to others than to yourself, and a tendency of pushing someone away so that they never get close enough to know you and reject you. It takes energy to keep shame hidden, to constantly assess the environment for threats and shame triggers. Your anger at the lack of justice and denial by others can be unrelenting. The end result is feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, and disconnected. Shame isn't guilt or low self-worth. It isn't always about something you've done, trauma, or morality. Shame is the feeling of not being good enough, of fearing rejection, abandonment, and disconnection from people. It is about not feeling good enough to really belong. Sam Young and the supporters of Protect Every Child are climbing mountains and unfurling banners in order to speak for the voiceless and the silent walking wounded. Sexually explicit discussions and interrogations behind closed doors, alone with an adult male, are considered a non-contact category of sexual abuse. It grooms minor victims to become accustomed to this kind of interaction and control. Parents have the right and responsibility to protect their children from harm. We must insist that our institutions create best practices for the protection of minors and vulnerable adults. Marcy Hamilton is a well-respected constitutional law scholar and CEO of Child USA, an interdisciplinary think tank to prevent child abuse and neglect. She is meeting with liability insurance carriers nationwide to set in place policies that require institutions to hold annual child protection audits. If the institution doesn't hold the audit or fails to pass the audit, they will lose their liability insurance. Hopefully, this initiative will be set in motion. Many institutions pay no taxes. As compassionate people and taxpayers, we need to demand that our institutions become part of the solution to this health crisis. Too often, child-serving institutions hold their dirty laundry on spin cycle. It's time to complete the final cleansing operation and begin to protect every child.
It's so nice to be in the presence of people who know the subject well and can speak so eloquently and powerfully. So thank you to both of you. Okay, so Joelle mentioned that this really is a public health matter. Is that what you said? Public health matter. That's the first time I've heard that, okay? A public health matter. And that goes right in with what I've listed here that I learned at a training I went through that every single church or institution should have that works with children. That child sex abuse is a root cause of the following problems we've got in our society. Violent crime. Child sex abuse, a root cause of violent crime, of homelessness. So we kind of don't want to look at the homeless that are on the streets. It's a root cause. Child sex abuse. Teen pregnancy. How about that? It results in teen pregnancy when there's child sex abuse. Health problems. Both of you mentioned various health problems. Substance abuse. The vast majority of incarcerated adults experienced childhood trauma. So our prisons are filled with people who experience child sex abuse. What a shame that is on our society that we're not standing up to the root cause that ends up in this bad stuff, that ends up harming kids into their adulthood right into prison. Child abuse is the most prevalent health problem children face. The most prevalent, yet we're not talking about it, we're not addressing it. It needs to be the centerpiece of our concerns, the issues that we need to be concerned about, because it is the number one health concern, health problem. As we end child abuse, as we start to lessen child abuse towards that goal of completely eliminating it, we will see the following things. We will see less violence. We want less violence in our society. That would help. Less homelessness, less post-traumatic stress illness, less substance abuse, less illness period, less teen pregnancy, less delinquency, and we'll see generations of healthier and happier children. Every hour, so this hour we're going to spend to get together, 77 cases, confirmed cases of child abuse will be reported across the country. This is an epidemic. This is a huge problem we've got. Judy ran down the cost to the taxpayer. Now, just the problems that we cause children, that ought to cause us to act. But then when we take a look at the money that it costs you and me out of our pockets, she mentioned $5 billion in the state of Utah, $5 billion a year. Here's the statistics for the entire country. So those 77 cases of confirmed child abuse, and most are not reported. So there's a lot more than that. If you take the number of abused children are abused every year, and you estimate the cost that Judy mentioned, it's $124 billion for the lifetime treatment of the lifetime expenses of that case of child abuse. $124 billion that will rack up this year. And then next year, another $120 billion that will be paid out, $24 billion. And who's paying for that? Now, yesterday, coming down from Mount Ben Lomond on the trail, we met a woman that she'd gotten there a couple of hours late, but she definitely wanted to participate. And we met her about halfway down, and she told me her story. And I cried at her story. And then she told me that she was threatened by the attorneys of the church where her child was abused, that if she sued them, they would reveal information that would be damaging to her family. That's extortion. Well, she was afraid of that, so they didn't sue the church. But her child was abused in church, in nursery, at 3 years old. And going through her story, it just made me cry. But that made me angry, that you've got a threat from a church, do not come after us, even though we facilitated the abuse. Otherwise, we're going to release information. That's mob tactics. So there's things that make me angry. The cost to our society financially makes me angry, in addition to the abuse to the children. That's coming out of our pockets, out of the taxpayers' pockets. Now, my guess is every single one of us, actually, would anybody here like to admit that they don't have to, that they're exempt from taxes? Is there anybody here exempt from taxes? Or we all have to pay taxes, right? We all have to pay taxes. Now, there's some tax-free organizations that facilitate the abuse of children that we have to pay for. Now, I don't know what percentage it is that are abused in these institutions. I don't know if it's 50% or 30% or 90%. Represented here is 100% were facilitated by the institutions. I know a couple of other people here that it was the institution that facilitated the abuse. Those institutions that cost us $124 billion, or let's say it's half, $60 billion a year, or here in Utah, $2.5 billion a year, if you just figure the institutions facilitated half of it. And they pay nothing. They're tax-free. And I'm thinking, how do we tolerate that? How do we look at the institution, they say, we're not going to do anything because we've got religious freedom. You got religious freedom? We've got freedom of speech. No, you do not have the freedom to have an institution that does not protect children, that allows the damages that are happening to our children, and not be accountable for it. I'm accountable. You're accountable. All of us have to pay out these massive amounts of money for this, and we're paying that bill, but the churches are not. That is not right. That is not fair that our children are being sexually abused, the facilitation of sexual abuse, and that the institutions are not paying the tab like we are. It's time that all of us put the interests of children as the number one issue. They're talking about landing on the moon, sending astronauts back to the moon. That's a cool thing. But it shouldn't be ahead of children. Why aren't we putting children number one? Why isn't children number one, moon number two? Or they're about to close down Temple Square. There's going to be a temple makeover. Well, that's kind of cool to have a nice new everything. I don't know how many millions of dollars. Is there an estimate on how much that's going to cost? Okay, it's going to cost, I don't know, millions and millions of dollars for a temple makeover. Well, that's fine. But why are children not on the top of that list? Why are they not saying, we are going to put protection of our children, number one, we're going to put in state-of-the-art child protection measures, and then we're also going to do a temple makeover. That needs to be number one. But it's not. It's not in most places in our society. There are a few places. Marches. Been some mention about marches. There are tons of things that people have marched for. Women's suffrage, none of us were alive, right? None of us were alive during that time, but hundreds of thousands of women marched for women's suffrage, and they got it. They're now marching, I'll get to that in just a sec. Civil rights, hundreds of thousands of people marched for civil rights. The end of Vietnam, I remember this. I don't know if I really liked that people were marching for the end of the Vietnam War, but looking back, I'm sure glad that ended. But hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets, marched to bring that, to protest this war. LGBT rights, the first march was in 1978. It drew 100,000 gay men. 100,000 took to the streets in the very first march. Good for them. And then there have been many since then. Equal rights for women in 1978, the first march, 100,000 people, I guess mostly women, showed up for equal rights amendment. And that didn't pass. But since then, there have been tons of marches. I mean, now it's every year, all over the place. There are marches to raise awareness of women's issues. Good for the women. I mean, millions of people have participated in those marches. Many other causes. And just this year, there have been a bunch of marches. A March for Life, indigenous peoples, to recognize to raise awareness of indigenous peoples' issues. The women, as I mentioned, voting rights. There have been marches for voting rights, gun violence, marches about that, marches about climate change. Where is the march for the children? Where is the march for the 1 in 3 in Utah, the 1 in 4 across the country that are being sexually abused? I mean, you look around this this group here, I don't know, are there 20 women? 1 out of 3, if you're all from Utah, then there's a likelihood that 7 of you have been sexually abused as a child. That is horrendous. The victims are all around us. We need to work. We need to be working so we don't look around the room in the future. We can look around the room in the future and say there are 20 women here, and hallelujah, not a single one was abused as a child. We want to eliminate that. So we're holding a march. The first nationwide, well, I don't know how to describe it, but the first major march that is dedicated to our children, dedicated to eliminating sexual abuse of our children. And I know we got to get that out of that somehow, the sexual part, because it is yucky to talk to. And I understand why people don't bring it up, because you don't want to talk about it. In this training I went through, they said the one reason that makes an environment safe or kind of facilitates sexual abuse is denial, fear. That you just want to hide it. We can't hide this anymore. Actually, I don't want to hide it. None of us want to hide it anymore. We're having a major march. Now, could we it doesn't matter who you talk to. Everybody wants to stop sexual abuse. But how you get that message out, this is our first major shot at getting that message out nationwide or worldwide. So, our goal is to have 5,000 people at that march. When I read down 100,000, 100,000, 300,000, a million at these marches, I'm thinking, geez, and I'm thinking we're going to struggle to get 5,000 people at this march. People have told me, look, that's going to be a really hard thing. Maybe you shouldn't be saying 5,000 because you'll look bad when 2 people show up. Well, I am going to talk about 5,000. This is an important issue. We should have 100,000 people in the streets. I encourage everybody that is concerned about child sex abuse, anybody that wants to eliminate what is happening to children across this nation, and right here, actually it's across the nation, we want to eliminate it. Come to the march, October 5th, 2019. So we're about two months away from this march. We've got that long for us to march, to marshal enough people that this is going to gain national attention and hopefully put this issue on the top burner and help organizations like SNAP, Zero Abuse Project, your organization. Good, yes, Restore Our Humanity. Yes, I got to get that. Restore Our Humanity. I got all the rest of them. But there are so many organizations that are working to this. We want this to be number one so they get more attention when they address whoever they would address, when they go in and talk to churches, businesses, the insurance companies. Okay, so that's what I want to end up on is well, let me mention two. One of the ways that we are highlighting raising this issue, building up to the march, is climbing mountains. Hundreds of people have climbed mountains over the last few months. This week, I don't know, we'll have hundreds this week that climb mountains. So we've got 11 mountains that we're climbing. We've already climbed 4. We've got 7 more to go. My feet are still hurting from yesterday's climb up Mount Ben Lomond. But that's okay. I'm willing to have burning feet to eliminate child abuse. That's where the real hurt and harm is. So feel free to join us on one of those marches. We put it on Facebook every night. We're going to Ensign Peak tonight. And then we're encouraging people to bring their banners to the streets of Salt Lake City. If you don't have a banner, come. Bring a poster. Just come. Come. Bring people. We are going to eliminate child sex abuse, and we're going to start with this gigantic march on October 5th. Thank you. Now, let me open this up to questions or comments. You certainly can ask questions of the real experts up here. Questions or comments?
I'm with the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm just wondering, when and where is the specific march that you guys announced?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Salt Lake Tribune, for being here. It starts at 9, it runs from 9 until 1 in the afternoon. So 9 will start to gather at the city-county building. And then we'll march up State Street to the state capitol. So we'll have a little rally at some speakers and some stuff. And then we'll do the same thing when we get to the top. We'll have some folks address us at the state capitol. Schedule on Facebook or on our website. So if you go to Protect Every Child, you'll find the schedule there. Or if you go to protecteverychild.com, you can find the schedule there. Thank you.
What's the difference between the petition you're doing now and the petitions that you did before the other one?
Okay, so
And if I sign the other petition, is it still important for me to sign your current petition?
So the question is, what's the difference between the two petitions that we had? We did a petition last year, and that petition was calling for no one-on-one interviews, no sexually explicit questions. That was directed specifically to the Mormon Church. There were over 50,000 people that signed that petition. The new petition, which we really haven't promoted that much, the new petition is the Protect LDS, Protect Every Child petition, and that is, we're calling for strong protections to be put in place in every institution, in every religious institution or any other institution that deals with children. So if you signed the other petition, that's directed to the Mormon Church. The other one is directed to every institution. So if you've signed the early one, feel free to sign the new one. You can find that petition if you go to protecteverychild.com, there's a link to the petition. Carol.
Hello, Sam.
Hello, Carol.
My name's Carolyn Barrow. I'm on the board with Restore Humanity. We stand with Protect Every Child and every other organization, individual person who is willing to come out and talk about this subject. The shame, the abuse, the life-altering
Well, Carolyn, I'm very sorry for what happened to you when you were a child. I believe you. When you said that your bishop, and this is a Mormon bishop, trafficked you, that statement right there, most people would say, man, I can't believe that. How in the world is a Mormon bishop involved with trafficking? Yet, was it 4 months ago, 5 months ago, a bishop in Lehigh was arrested in a sex trafficking sting by the police. He was out trying to recruit prostitutes to be under his, in his, I don't even know the term, stable of prostitutes or something. And this was the man that was being trusted with the young women behind closed doors where he can talk about sex. So,
Want those one-on-one interviews where the young women would go to talk about an issue or something that happened, and you blackmail them into talking.
yeah. We're working so that doesn't happen to anybody else, Carolyn. Paul, can you come up here and state this so we can all hear it?
They said we're not supposed to tell you. Yeah. Our two boys came home from camp, 1997, and they were walking across the lawn, and we said, what's wrong? And they said, we said, how's camp? And they said, we're not supposed to tell you what happened. Okay. It took an hour to get them to finally be on, they had these scout leaders, and incidentally, this is a scout camp that was almost exclusively LDS, in a council that's almost exclusively LDS, with all the leaders that were all LDS. It took almost an hour to get them to open up and believe that they could tell us that they didn't have an allegiance to the church and scouting. And so finally the story came out, and we found out that they arrested the guy at the camp. It took them, they spent 3 days trying to get leaders to believe them. And finally, after 3 days, they arrested a guy who had attacked them over 5 times, and they watched him attack other kids and so forth. But that's just almost not even important in how the story unfolded. I was a seminary teacher at the time, and the prosecuting attorney knew this young man was a returned missionary. He'd sexually abused a kid in Alaska. He's here in running around in your streets free today in Salt Lake. But anyway, he confessed to molesting 24 kids, most of them from very high-profile LDS homes. He was kind of a trophy hunter. In other words, he targeted the most, there was something really strange in the way he targeted people. But anyway, he confessed to 24 very, very specific accounts, gave all the details, and the prosecuting attorney, who was a church official in Bonneville County, dismissed the charges. We got in just an act of rage, we got in the news. We called up the news and said, you want a really good story? They came, filmed us, and you know that feeling like, am I going to look like an idiot? As a section of the news went off, I sat back and I thought, well, that went pretty good. And from there until 1 o'clock in the morning, victims called saying that they were molested at scout camp and so forth. What happened from that is that we started realizing our story is just a small thing. And we took that inertia and realized we're either going to destroy ourselves as a family or do something productive. So our two boys sued scouting, which was very productive, because we humiliated them in front of the Supreme Court of Idaho. And at the same time, Deborah and I took on this project to remove the criminal statute of limitations on sexual abuse and the civil statute on limitations on sexual abuse, and extend the reporting law. But I'll tell you what, initially, our opposition in this was scouting and well-intended Mormon legislators who thought God was directing them to protect the church. In 1 year, we got the criminal statute of limitations removed. And at the judiciary hearing, over 200 victims showed up to tell their story, and most of them told their story for the first time. We got a complete unanimous vote. I know you're not going to be able to do that in this state. I know there's some efforts to thinking about it, but it took a great deal of strategy. But we had no idea of this undercurrent. Once we woke up victims all over the state, I went into a legislator's office and he says, "We're done. Whatever law you want, we're going to pass it. Look at this stack of letters." And they were all from victims of sexual abuse. What you need to do in this state is figure out how to tap into these people who most of them didn't do anything when they were abused. And they live vicariously through whatever you do to make things better, because they're suffering from guilt. They're thinking, why didn't I stop that person? And so this is one of the most kind things you can do, is get them involved and allow them to do something. There.
Paul, you're exactly right. That's what we have to start our advantage of trying to do, is to provide safe space for survivors to come forward, they can tell their story, be heard, to believe. And this is something we're working on right now. And you're absolutely right. That's absolutely what we need to do, is bring them together. They better know they're not alone.
Well, and we can talk all we want, but until you legislate this,
Yeah, and that's what some of the
and
comes out of this. When we can march up survivors in front of the legislature.
and the legislation that really corrupts all of this. We started a nation on separation of church and state, but we left the foot in the door with this damnable law called priest penitent. Okay? And that law has to go, because that is the haven that allowed the Catholic Church problem. When push goes to shove, that law is the one that protects the churches, the priests, and everybody else from taking care of their criminal this criminal violation. Anyway, our story, by the time we were done, we had the support of every newspaper in the state, and we had, in the editorial pages across the state, there's over 400 articles of people writing in and telling their story in this. So I agree with what you're doing here. I think it's wonderful, and it's something that really needs to be done. But I think that we'll all go home and feel good, and then we'll find that it's the same problem tomorrow until you change the legislation and put teeth into this in a way that when it really does happen, which it does every day, that people will quit turning to their bishops, and bishops will quit thinking, well, I'm an attorney, I'm a law enforcement, I'm this, I'm that. They will quit thinking that way, and they will take the spiritual matters, work with the spiritual matters, whatever that means, And then they'll take the criminal matters and say, look, I'm not an attorney and I'm not a police officer. We're going to take this straight to the police. And that's how it should be done. And they should be completely boxed out of this issue. And there should be, I mean, we should actually have a law against some stranger counseling your children over sexual abuse. And put some real teeth into this. But anyway, every time I hear this, I get all excited, and I think, now what are you going to do from here? We know of a very large class action lawsuit that if any of you want to contact us with, the law is the only way. And now this is the last thing, and I'll get out of your hair here. We have been hardwired to believe that suing is wrong. Guess who hardwired us to think that? The institutions who don't want to be sued. So they teach us from little kids that if you sue, Christ said give their coat and this and don't go to the court and all. That was meant to protect institutions. You cannot throw an institution in jail, but you can take their money. And usually an institution like Scouting or the church, you can take their money. I know an attorney that's sued them over 150 times and hasn't changed anything. But the publicity that comes with taking their money makes people say, you know what, I'll bet there's a problem here and we better address it. And that's civil law and suing. Every single person that gets sexually abused should be suing the institution that allowed that systemic abuse.
Can I add to this?
Yeah.
The only reason that the Catholic Church has enforced any kind of, or there's been any change in the Catholic Church has had absolutely nothing to do with charity and benevolence, but it's been because of civil lawsuits that have been brought on by survivors. And the civil lawsuits and the documents that have been exposed in the civil lawsuits is what has made officials such as Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania and so on to initiate grand jury reports that have also brought forward other documents. And so that's why I spoke about civil windows in states such as Arizona and New Jersey and New York that allow older victims, no matter when the abuse occurred, to come forward. So in states such as Utah, I mean, getting a civil window pass that would allow older victims to come forward will be close to impossible. Getting prospective legislation would probably be much easier.
There are a few things we can look at because it was taken out of these like the federal cases was not then there could be some kind of court action.
Well, the big argument's ex post facto law.
That's the
And-
criminal side. You can't do that.
You can't go back, but you can do this, and it's fair. And California, they opened up a window, and they said, you can go, we'll give you a 5-year window or something.
Yeah, we had a 1-year window, and that's how I came forward in 2003. And I was allowed to expose documents that showed the cover-up in my own case, even though my statute of limitations had expired. And we have one in Arizona. So if you were abused by your Mormon bishop in Arizona, no matter when you were abused, you can come forward in the civil courts right now. Yeah.
And the other thing you can do is what they call a discovery clause. And that is essential, and it can work it retroactive if it's instituted properly.
The largest factor that we have here, though, is the institution that we're talking about here in the LDS Church owns and controls the largest law firm in the state.
Let me tell you something really interesting. While we were being slaughtered in the newspapers, Curtin and McConkie sent their attorneys to work with us to help write the legislation on the criminals, removing the criminal statute of limitation, and then made us promise we wouldn't tell anybody. Whoops, I just told somebody. But anyway, but then when it was the civil side, it was we were on our own and hoped they didn't get it passed. Anyway, I'll let Sam, I didn't mean to steal your show there, Sam, so.
I want to let you know,
Let
Representative,
me just do something real quick. So I know the press wants to wrap up. Did any of the press want interviews with any of the panel before you leave? So we're good. You do want interviews? Good. So this will be our last comment, and then we'll.
I want you to know that Representative Angela Romero is working to introduce a bill in the next legislative session that will take the priest penitent loophole out of mandated reporting. And so we need to get behind Angela Romero and this effort that she's making to change the law in Utah. We have a problem because the state legislators here most of them have been through the temple and have vowed with their lives to support and protect the LDS Church. And so we need to get our voices out there and support Angela Romero, who is an advocate for survivors.
Thank you. So I love hearing about the work, wherever Paul went, but Paul and Joel, who have actually been instrumental in legislation being passed. And we've seen this in several places. It really needs to be everywhere. So supporting legislative efforts is an important thing. Okay, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it, and have a super day. And we do have some more food, it looks like.